Welcome everyone. OnPay is back with another session to help answer your questions, address your concerns, and give you some resources so you feel prepared to return to work. Yes, that's right. Today's topic is what employers need to know about returning to work. Very excited to have you all back with us. And if it's your first time joining us, welcome. Now, before we begin, let's meet your presenters. Please note that just like many of you across the country, we are working from home. We've done our best to minimize any potential for background noise, but if you should hear a dog barking in the background or a kid playing, please ignore, please be patient with us. And today I am joined by the incomparable Jessica Miles. Jessica?
Hey guys, my name is Jessica. I'm a product manager here for OnPay. One of the things I do is make sure that payroll and HR updates are implemented into our software and make it really compliant and simple for you. I have 9 years of payroll experience and I'm certified as a payroll professional by the American Payroll Association.
Perfect. And I'm Kara Rajapakse. I help accountants and bookkeepers have the best experience possible with us so they can focus on serving their clients. I'm the partner development team lead on OnPay's partners team, and I previously did the prior wage entry, data migration, and setup of OnPay accounts. Jess, I know you've been working on COVID-19 related payroll, HR changes, you're fielding questions left and right about returning to work, and you're seeing a lot of good questions come up again and again.
Yeah, I am. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. So we'll be talking about employers and if they can check an employee's health as they come back to work. We'll talk about a return to work checklist. We'll also talk about communicating expectations to employees. And we'll break down the difference between some key terms like layoff and furlough, as well as topics that are not as fun like unemployment.
But very much necessary. And on another note too, if everyone visits onpay.com/COVID-19, we've got some amazing articles and resources that you can review after this presentation. But let's commence with the asking of the questions. So Jess, we've seen surveys from staffing agencies like Robert Half that indicate that as many as 90%, that's 90% of employees have gone into work even when they were feeling under the weather, which is a huge number to me, at least. So understandably, a lot of employers out there want to know, what questions can you ask employees about their health?
Yeah, so first, employers should remember that the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, applies to businesses with 15 or more employees. So that's most businesses in the US. This means that there are many questions that you can't ask your employees because it could risk violating the law and the employee's privacy. So let's talk about the ones you can ask, like Kara mentioned. So you can ask in general about an employee's well-being, how they're feeling, if the employee looks tired or ill, if they're feeling okay, you can ask that. You can also ask whether the employee can perform their job function, and you can also ask about non-disability related impairments, like how did you break your leg, or the name of an emergency contact.
All right, well, let's talk about what employers can't ask. Can an employer ask employees to disclose whether they have any underlying health conditions?
So generally the answer is no. Asking an employee about underlying health conditions may require the employee to disclose the existence of a disability, and that would violate the ADA. So if you're concerned about an employee's health, you still shouldn't ask about some things under it. And you also shouldn't ask if the employee is pregnant or taking medication. We know that COVID-19 does present new challenges to employers to consider as well, because this is such an unprecedented time for us.
And Jess, you mentioned COVID-19. I think that's a great segue into our next question. Can you check an employee's health during the COVID-19 crisis?
So actually the answer to that is yes, Kara. The EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, confirmed that employers are allowed to take employee temperatures as they come into work, even though that usually counts as a medical exam under the ADA under any other circumstance.
Got it. Are employers able to ask about other symptoms related to COVID outside of fever or taking temperatures?
So the EEOC has also said that companies are permitted to ask employees who are physically entering the workplace if they've had symptoms of, a diagnosis of, or have been tested for COVID-19. Please keep in mind this excludes those who are telecommuting.
Got it. That makes sense. And I'd like to add something too. Please remember all medical information should be treated as confidential. That also includes that temperature tracking that we were just discussing. And if one of your employees discloses to you as their employer that they have been diagnosed, you cannot reveal that person's name to other employees. And for employees who are absent due to reasons related to COVID-19, can employers require them to return to work with a doctor's note?
Yeah, so that's another great question, Kara. The EEOC has stated that an employer may require an employee to provide a doctor's note that certifies that they are able to safely return to work if they were out of work because they were sick as a result of COVID-19. But keep in mind that healthcare professionals are really busy, doctors' offices are really busy during this time. So some flexibility may be needed because an employee might not be able to get in with their doctor.
Absolutely. And what if this impacts not the employee necessarily, but their family members? Can an employer ask an employee with a sick family member to stay at home?
So that's another great question. The ADA and the EEOC has given guidance on this, and they say that if an employer believes that an employee will pose a direct threat to the workplace because of a diagnosis of COVID-19 or a exposure to somebody who has been diagnosed with COVID-19, employers can ask them to remain home.
Got it. And I think it'd be good too to talk about what else employers should keep in mind when they're preparing to reopen. If you are an employer who has the workplace open already, doesn't hurt to keep these items in mind either. But let's start with new policies. So it's always a good idea to establish procedures or policies that specify who will return to work, when will that employee return to work, and how employees can return to work. Are they physically coming into the workplace? Are they teleworking? And also to consider creating a new policy for social distancing. Take into consideration state and local guidance as well.
Now, Kara, I feel like we're always telling people one of these things, and it's document, document, document.
Yes, it really should just be its own slide at this point. But as always, we want to remind employers, make any necessary updates to the employee handbook regarding items like leave, working from home, hiring practices, travel, benefits offerings. Make sure they're available in writing. And then also, more importantly, make sure that they are available to your employees in writing as well. So whether you're providing an updated document, whether you're adding it to an employee portal, make sure that they can actually view those changes. What this is doing is really helping to create a paper trail as to how you're making the workplace safe for your employees.
Yeah, so piggybacking off of that, let's talk about posting notices. Employers with fewer than 500 employees are required by law to have a poster about the FFCRA visible to employees in the workplace. As a reminder, the FFCRA is the Families First Corona Response Act and includes provisions about sick leave, paid sick leave, and also paid leave for family care or child care during the crisis. Employees don't have to physically be in the office to see the notice, so keep in mind that you should send it by email or post it to an employee portal if your employees are telecommuting.
Yep. And in terms of health and safety, more relevant than ever, California, as an example, recently passed legislation that if an employee is working outside of their home and they are diagnosed with COVID-19, the employer actually must file the claim with their workers' comp insurance carrier, and the burden does rest with the employer to prove that the employee did not contract COVID while on the job. I know that's just California to start, but we're not sure if similar other states are going to pass similar legislation.
Yeah, so let's talk about some steps employers can take to promote health and safety on the job. So one thing you can do is provide hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, no-touch trash cans, and if it's applicable for your business, face masks or face coverings to your employees. We also mentioned before that you can create and share a new safe social distancing policy with your employees, and make sure employees who are sick and they're currently at home, stay home. And if employees come into work and appear to be sick, we would urge you to send them home. Also be aware of the requirements in your state if you do send workers home, that you might have to pay, of course you have to pay time worked, but you might also have to pay sick leave, or they may be eligible for unemployment benefits if you send them home.
Yeah, and overall, just stay prepared. You're already being very proactive by attending this webinar today. Keep that proactiveness going by making sure you have a plan B if absenteeism spikes or if another shelter in place or stay at home order occurs in the future. We just have no way of knowing at this point. So, just what else should employers be mindful of when their employees are returning to work?
Yeah, so communication is definitely important right now. Now more than ever, employees want to know that your employer or their employer will be what they'll be doing to keep them safe as they return to work. First, you'll need to determine who's returning to work. Consider who you'll be bringing back and whether you'll stagger shifts or certain departments.
What about once they're back on the job itself?
Absolutely. Employees need to know what's going on, right? So they're going to ask you questions and I would be prepared to answer them. Things like, do they need to wear a face mask? Can they wear a face mask if they're more comfortable? Especially for those customer facing or public facing employees. Will hand sanitizer or hand washing stations be available? Have work hours changed based on the COVID-19 crisis? As an employer, you can take temperatures. We discussed that before, but make sure that you're letting employees know in advance that you're going to be taking temperatures so that they know that this is a policy. And it could be seen as discriminatory if you took temperatures for some employees and not others. So we do suggest taking it for all employees if you do make that choice for your business.
Good suggestions there. And just let's go back to the types of employees that an employer is bringing back. So if a business is reopening after a closure due to COVID-19, can they bring some employees back but not others?
Yes, so the short answer to that question is yes. If you are requiring some workers to come back, but not all positions at this time, definitely document the business reasons why those positions are being called back. And then furthermore, if you're recalling some employees who work in a certain position, but not all employees that work in that position, what should you do, Kara?
Document, it's the word of the day.
Yes, absolutely. So document the objective of bringing those employees back, as well as the job related criteria that you used to decide which employees to bring back. Seniority or past performance, for example, would be acceptable criteria to base those decisions on, and they'd be relatively easy to defend if you were ever challenged.
Got it. So we're also seeing, speaking of employees and workers, furlough and layoffs and terms like that in the workplace right now. What's the difference?
Yeah, so both are commonly due to lack of work. A furlough is when employees are put on temporary leave for a specific amount of time, whether that be 2 weeks, 8 weeks, 16 weeks. It's a specified amount of time ahead of time. Usually it's unpaid, but we have seen companies either allow or require employees to use paid time off during that time. And the big key to this is that employees still have their job and they're expected to return to work when conditions improve. They may also get to keep their health insurance. A layoff is generally considered a total separation from the company. If you recall employees in either of these categories, remember to give them enough notice to come back to work. They might need to take care of things like childcare, or just have time to ensure they're ready to come back to work. But also be prepared that if an employee was furloughed or laid off, they may have found other employment.
Good things to keep in mind. Now, for employers, do they need to complete new hire reporting and paperwork for all returning workers?
So in most cases, no. If your employee was not separated from payroll, documenting the temporary layoff or the furlough dates in their personnel profile is sufficient. But if an employee was laid off for a long period of time, then you'd want to possibly rehire the employee. You'd want to be prepared to go through your hiring process or your onboarding checklist for them, make sure they've signed all the appropriate forms, and file new hire reporting if it's been a long time. But as a general rule of thumb, basically if any significant changes have happened, like a new job title or a pay rate change, those should be documented as well, and it's good reason to possibly put them through the new hire process.
Got it. So I'm hearing document, document, document again. Good thing to keep in mind.
Always.
Always. I don't think, though, that just from what I'm hearing, remote working as a concept is going away anytime soon. It is going to be interesting to see how prevalent this is in the future. But right now, do employers have to give employees the option to telework?
Yeah, so that's not required. Nobody's going to require you to allow your employees to telework. However, working remotely could be considered a reasonable accommodation for an employee under the ADA. So while there's no requirement, there could be an exception. And if we're talking about trends, there's a study from Gartner that I recently read that projects about 48% of employees will spend at least some time working remote after the pandemic is over. That's actually an 18% increase over the 30% who previously remotely worked.
Oh my gosh.
Before COVID.
No, that's crazy. So I don't think it's going away. And I think what's interesting is I saw a study, and I think it was at the same firm actually, that mentioned employers are utilizing technology to help enable telework. So they're already adopting these as a practice. I think they said around 20% of businesses started to use some form of time tracking software or monitoring software for remote workers.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how businesses are adapting, and I think it'll be even more interesting to see how it affects our workforce in the future.
Yeah. Now, what if an employee doesn't feel comfortable returning to work? Can they still collect unemployment?
So if an employee declines to return to work, in most cases, they can't continue to collect unemployment. However, I would defer to the state as the ultimate guide on that. They do determine this on a case-by-case scenario. OnPay does have a great state-by-state guide to unemployment where you can find how your state is handling this, and it directs you directly to the state website for additional guidance.
Oh, nice. And then for those of you listening, don't forget that's in our COVID-19 Resource Center. We're always updating that center. So in general, that's a really good page to bookmark. And then Jess, another question for you. Will my unemployment rates increase if my employees are filing for unemployment?
Yeah, so we hear this a lot. In general, the more employees that use unemployment benefits, the higher the employer's rate will be. So the state reevaluates those rates on an annualized basis based on the number of claims that you had last year. But this year, because of COVID-19, some states have already announced that they're not going to allow COVID-19 related unemployment claims to affect an employer's rate. In the state-by-state unemployment guide we mentioned earlier, we have links available for the state COVID-19 related information.
Good to know. So we've got resources for you out there. Again, onpay.com/COVID-19. We've gone over a lot today. Jess, I appreciate your time. Viewers, I appreciate your time. We'll see you again next month. Stay safe and healthy, y'all.
Bye, guys.